Hey guys, welcome to another tier list video. Today I'm going to rank every US president since World War II. Now, I'm not American myself, so this is kind of an outsider's perspective on them. If you're American, feel free to disagree and tell me I'm ignorant of your country. All right, so first up we have FDR, the GOAT. He was first elected in 1933 and he died in office in 1945. So he was a four-term president, the only president to serve more than two terms. And he died just a few weeks before the end of World War II. So FDR brought in a kind of new version of capitalism, I guess you could say, based on Keynesian economics. He created the New Deal, which helped get the American economy out of the Great Depression, and it also led America through World War II. So a lot of the economic kind of, how should I say it, like the boom of the 1950s and 60s in America is really down to the groundwork that he laid. So a major W. Um, he was also, of course, a great wartime leader. Since 1941, he actually wanted to join the war earlier, but the U.S. Public was against it, understandably. But from 1941 to 1945, he led the American effort against Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. So I largely agree with his foreign policy for sure. The dark side of that now is, of course, the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II without trial. Over 100,000 of them were kept sin for the whole 4 years after the attack in December 1941 from Japan. So that's definitely a mark against him. But more broadly speaking, I think he improved not just the world, but also domestic politics in America as well with his economic approach because the country was really in tatters during the 1930s. So I actually would put him on S tier. He's usually ranked as one of the top three presidents, the other two being Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. Um, I definitely have to go S tier. Okay, so up next we have Truman. He took over after FDR died in office, and he served another term after that. So yeah, he oversaw the end of World War II, the creation of the United Nations, and I think it was San Diego in 1945, and also oversaw the Marshall Plan, which was basically an economic program that rebuilt Europe after the end of World War II, which was fantastic. He also helped found NATO. I mean, a lot of people don't like NATO, but broadly speaking, the most successful military alliance in world history, although it's coming apart now. But that's definitely a win, at least from America's perspective. I mean, it kept America engaged in Europe, but I also think it was kind of mutually beneficial for a long time. His biggest foreign policy failing was definitely the Korean War, being unprepared for the North to attack, not understanding that there was a war imminent there, failing to pre- failing to predict that China would intervene once you got close to the North Korean border, and also for the partition of Korea to begin with, which started in 1945 and led to the Civil War. All around, did not handle Korea very well. Um, it also led to a 3-year war that ended after he left office, I think. Yeah, after he left office. Eisenhower brought it to an end. Domestically, Truman desegregated the military. So that was the first step towards equal rights for African Americans. And also oversaw the biggest expansion of the US economy. I mean, he was kind of coasting on what FDR built up, but post war US was the most powerful country in the world, and it wasn't even close. So, yeah, broadly speaking, a successful president. I mean, you could criticize some of the stuff in relation to the Cold War because that began under him as well. Um, I don't know. He doesn't have FDR's vibe as well, not as iconic. I'm gonna put Truman at about a B, I think. Yeah. Next, you got the big Ike, Eisenhower. He was a Republican president, but kind of moderate for a Republican. Um, he was actually a five-star general during World War II, and he was essential for the victory in Western Europe. Bit of an OG for that. On the domestic front, he advanced the civil rights for African Americans, including the enforcement of school desegregation. Um, Infrastructure-wise, he championed the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, which created the highway system in America. Although you can definitely put that as a disadvantage if you hate how car dependent the US is, I guess. um, Foreign policy wise, he was a big Atlanticist, did a lot for cementing NATO during the first 10 years of its existence. Um, Definitely understood that a third world war just needed to be avoided. I mean, he had fought in World War II, he served in World War One, but I don't think he saw action. Uh, and yeah, he was dedicated to like a long lasting peace in Europe, which is great. Um, what's interesting about him is that in his farewell address, he discussed the military industrial complex, which is kind of crazy considering he was a five-star general and you'd think he would be, a bit of a hawkish guy. But yeah, obviously right about that, even though it's not really discussed all that much anymore. I don't know. But yeah, all around I would say, oh, he also of course ended the Korean War. He got a ceasefire on that, which is great. Um and I think his vice president was Richard Nixon, if I'm not mistaken. Overall, I'd give him a pretty similar ranking to Truman, although I put him probably a little bit below. But yeah, I'll go B tier. So up next, you got JFK, of course, the president that was assassinated in Texas, by Lee Harvey Oswald. He's really remembered for his Cold War diplomacy. He managed to get America through the Cuban Missile Crisis alive, which is great. Um, and he also created the first nuclear weapons treaty in 1963. Definitely highlighted a preference for diplomacy when it came to the Soviet Union, which is great. He also began a space race, or at least in the US public, he really was the first to discuss it and dedicate America to getting boots on the moon, which is pretty cool. Of course, he would never see it. He also contributed to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. He kind of pushed the way for it a bit, although he wouldn't live to see it either. He's also really remembered for his banner speeches that are a bit idealistic, and he kind of didn't live up to the standard he laid out. Relatable. Um, but yeah, pretty memorable for sure. Foreign policy, though, unfortunately, he was the first president to send troops to Vietnam as military advisors to the South Vietnamese government. So you can kind of blame him for, getting the toe in to Vietnam for that as well, which is a mark against him, I think. And there's also lots of conspiracy theories that he was too much of a peace activist kind of president, and the CIA killed him for it. Don't know about that, but I mean, I love a good conspiracy theory as much as the next guy. He was a Democrat as well, um, so kind of more left wing on economic issues than Ike for sure. Overall, though, I think he's really more memorable than like as in I feel like the fact that he was handsome, he might have had an affair with Marilyn Monroe, and he got killed on TV, kind of made him more famous than he had the right to be, I guess, if that makes any sense. Not downplaying his achievements or anything, and I do like him. He was the first Catholic president, up the lads, but I do think he's kind of overhyped. Um, Although I like his foreign policy, like I like his how he supported multilateralism, and I don't know, it might be a bit hippy dippy, but mm, I go. Oh god, could I put him on B tier as well? That's a bit crowded at that stage, though, isn't it? Let's go. Mm, I'll go. No, no, no. I'm gonna put B tier. Okay, so up next we got LBJ, Lyndon B. Johnson. He was the vice president of JFK, and he took over after he was assassinated. Um, this guy's like a big contradiction, okay? Because he had this idea called the Great Society, which is about like kind of like spreading out the welfare system in America. Like he established Medicare and Medicaid in 1965, so he provided healthcare for the elderly and the poor. Fantastic. He also domestically like had so many policies, like an unprecedented amount of legislation, including I have a list here: the Fair Housing Act, immigration reform, gun control, and educational funding. His administration focused on reducing malnutrition, hunger, and improving environmental protection across the country. So, I mean, like you hear all that and you think, great, right? But then you have to remember the Vietnam War. So he was the first president to send combat troops to Vietnam in 1965. Ended up getting bogged down there, big time. I mean, I think over 50,000 American soldiers died. Over a million Vietnamese died. I mean, it was just fucking brutal. Super unpopular domestically and just around the world in general, and of course ended in failure. And not just Vietnam, he also was involved heavily in wars in Laos and Cambodia. So just a horrific, horrific war, three wars really. Um, Massive stain on his legacy, and he was very much hated by a lot of the left wing in the U.S. Even though, like domestically, hearing the stuff that he did, you think like, oh wow, this guy was like super progressive. But I mean, you just can't wash blood off, can you? So I'll give him a C, I think. Also brought in the of course the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which protected the rights of African Americans, even though he was racist. I mean, the guy was just a massive contradiction. Genuinely pretty fucking crazy. Sorry, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. So now we're on to Richard Nixon, Eisenhower's vice president, who was elected in 1969 as president of the United States. So he was a Republican. He served two terms. What I really like about him, though, is his foreign policy. So he helped end the Vietnam War, of course, big improvement on LBJ. He also did the China pivot, where he normalized relations with the Chinese. I think it was in 1972. That reorientated geopolitics kind of worldwide, and we're still living with repercussions of it. But I think it was overall a good thing for both countries, even though now, I mean, you can say, oh, maybe it was a mistake because China is their adversary now. But 50 years ago, it made a lot of sense because the Sino Soviet split had happened. They wanted the Chinese more on their side. And I do think America has benefited from the pivot as well. So, foreign policy wise, pretty decent. He also pursued easing Cold War tensions, including signing a bunch of arms control treaties with the Soviets. So that's good. Domestically, he established the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, that's been gutted by Trump, um, and also signed the National Environmental Policy Act. So if you're a greenie, maybe you'd like that. He also enforced desegregation of Southern schools more effectively than some other presidents. Now onto the really bad stuff. Um, his resignation, right? So he is the only US president to resign following the Watergate scandal, which caused incredible damage to the public trust in their institutions, which had already been eroded during the Vietnam War. Um, so I mean, that's what he's remembered for the most, right? He's also kind of has a real perception in the public about being a kind of a ruthless and power hungry politician. And he definitely was. Like, on a personal level, I'd say he was a bastard. Maybe even a little bit like autistic, honestly. I saw some interviews with him. I don't think he had very good social skills at all. But yeah, foreign policy good, internally horrific. Although I do like the EPA. I'll give him a C as well. No, actually, yeah, I'll give him a C. Fuck it. Okay, so now we're on to the most forgettable president, Gerald Ford, who served after Nixon, also as a Republican. He he's mostly remembered for his Nixon pardon. He decided basically to save Nixon from going to prison or being punished in any legal way by giving him a presidential pardon. This is really controversial. Some people think that like, oh, he did a great thing because he prevented like a lot of political instability. But I hate it. So that's definitely marked against him, in my opinion. He also had a pretty hard time on the economy. There was a lot of stagflation, so like high inflation combined with high unemployment. He tried to stimulate the economy through tax cuts. Foreign policy wise, he continued working with the Soviet Union and signed some accords with them to help improve relationships. Um, Overall, though, very forgettable president. And the reason he didn't get a second term was in part because of the economic conditions. I will give him, it seems disrespectful to even put him on a C. Yeah, okay, I'll put him there. Like, I don't really have a strong opinion on him one way or the other, just mid. Okay, so now we're on to Jimmy Carter, also a one-term president, oddly enough. Um, the best thing he did, at least that I know of, is the Camp David Accords. He managed to get a peace treaty between Egypt and Israel, which has held for 50 years now, which was a fantastic achievement. Israel had to like dismantle all their settlements in the Sinai, give the land back, and Egypt had to normalize relations with them. Big win-win. I'd love to see something like that with some of Israel's neighbors, but I don't think that'll happen anytime soon. He tried to focus like American foreign policy more around human rights because he was very, very left wing, proper liberal, but he didn't really live up to it. I mean, that's a pretty common thread with a lot of politicians. He provided military aid to the Mujahideen to fight the Soviets, which, okay, yeah, it screwed over the Soviet Union, but it also led to the rise of the Taliban and they helping Al Qaeda, so not great. And he also kept selling weapons to Indonesia to continue their mass killings in East Timor. So, kind of a disappointment on that. He also created the Departments of Energy and Education and was a conservationist as well. He helped protect a lot of like national monuments, which is lovely. Um, Challenges, he also faced a lot of high inflation, including the energy crisis due to a war in the Middle East. Does that sound familiar? And what really screwed him over though was the Iran hostage crisis, which I mean, people think he fucked it up pretty much. And so that led to a failed re-election bid. So kind of a disappointment, and he's considered very mid-tier. Um, Even though I think publicly he has a pretty good persona. He only passed away recently, actually, but he did a lot of like charity work for the rest of his life. So a lot of people think highly of him for that. Definitely not a great president though. I'll put Jimmy. Yeah, I guess I'll put it on C. It's feeling very crowded. Next we have Reagan himself. Um, Ronald Reagan was a Republican. He served 2 terms, and he was arguably the most influential conservative since World War II. He promoted this new term, Reaganomics, which was an economic policy involving massive tax cuts, deregulation, and reduced spending to stimulate growth. Basically, neoliberalism. And he also promoted this economic system around the entire world, really. And Yeah, like, look, it's taken off. I think it's horrific. I think it's a massive mistake, both for America and for the world. And, um, I think a lot of, like, problems with modern America over the last 40 years really start with Reagan, with all of these cuts. And deregulation, letting companies just get even more powerful in the US. I mean, that's really rotted their political system in a lot of ways. Um, yeah, he also oversaw a significant increase in the national debt due to all of these tax cuts. But of course, he also increased defense spending. So yeah, that causes problems on if you're gonna want a deficit or not. He's also remembered for the drug war, which he led, which has had disastrous results for the US and for the world, especially like the drug war in Mexico and just Jesus. He's also criticized a lot for how he handled AIDS. He basically just didn't handle it. He just let it happen for quite a long time. Um, Foreign policy wise, he adopted like a really strongly anti-Soviet stance, but he also engaged in diplomacy at the same time. He kind of did a bit of both. Um, which arguably contributed to the Soviet Union's collapse because he worked a lot with Gorbachev to kind of like encourage reforms. So I guess you could say that's a positive thing for the US. What else? Oh, the Reagan doctrine. Yeah. Okay. So he also did horrific shit in South America, like every US president. He had something called the Iran Contra affair, where he sold weapons to Iran illegally, and then with that money, he bought weapons, and then he gave to the rebels in Nicaragua to kill communists, basically. That was obviously a massive scandal, pretty horrific. He denied that he had any involvement in it or any awareness of it, but yeah, okay. He also was a big supporter of the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, which, has definitely had blowback, but it did help screw over the Soviet Union. But overall, I think this guy's like just a demon. Uh, I'm a hardcore Ronald Reagan hater. I'm gonna give him D tier. That's how strongly I feel about that. Up next, we have, of course, George Bush Sr., who was also a Republican and a one-term president. Interestingly, he was the last World War II veteran to become president. I think he was a pilot against the Japanese in the Pacific. He's mostly remembered for his foreign policy because he managed the dissolution of the Soviet Union well enough, I guess. Um, and he also intervened during the Gulf War, right? This is when Iraq invaded Kuwait, fucked up the oil supply worldwide. The US said no, 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 and invaded, and there was a 6-month war that the US won. He decided famously not to march on Baghdad, a mistake his son would later make. But it did a lot of dark shit during Desert Storm, but not completely unprovoked, to be honest. He is also remembered for his intervention in Panama. I think he overthrew, it was a dictatorship, I think. And obviously, they wanted a pro US government. Yeah. So another bit of imperialism in South America. But it did lead to a democratic transition in Panama that I think still holds today. So, additionally, he did some work on the Disabilities Act, and he also contributed to environmental policy as well. But for the most part, he's really only remembered for his foreign policy. I would probably give him. I give him a D, C, 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 C. So now we're on to Bill Clinton. He was a Democrat, two-term president. He's really upped for his handling of the economy. His presidency oversaw a huge economic expansion, including job creation and a budget surplus, all of which are kind of uncommon. Uh, his approach was called the third way, which was kind of like Reagan light. Everybody at this stage had bought into Reagan economics. And the difference between the Democratic and the Republican Party in the 90s economically was very slim. So, but he kind of had like a slightly more moderate version of it. He brought in some welfare reform. to support low-income families, kind of like half-heartedly. Uh, Additionally, he signed NAFTA, which had been in the works for a long time, which improved economic relations between Mexico, Canada, and the United States. Foreign policy-wise, he oversaw NATO expansion into Eastern Europe and the US's handling of the Yugoslavian conflict, including interventions in Kosovo. That is kind of seen as more like a victory for him, but he also oversaw a US intervention in Somalia that ended in total disaster. So, kind of, he had foreign policy wins and a lot of losses as well. Um, what he's really remembered for, aside from Kosovo, is his scandal and impeachment. He was caught basically sleeping with a one of his coworkers called Monica Lewinsky, and he was even brought before the Senate and everything over it. He was sleeping with her in the Oval Office, and he was married, so it was a big scandal. Kind of seems small scale now that we know that Bill Clinton was good friends with, of course, Jeffrey Epstein. So he probably did a lot worse stuff, to be honest. Um, I kind of hate the guy. I'm not gonna lie, even though I take him over what we have now, for sure. Um, I guess I'll put him on C. Now we're on to Bush Jr., who I also hate. He oversaw the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. Of course, Iraq lied through his fucking teeth about the justification for it. Had a massive blowback, led to the rise of ISIS, an 8-year insurgency with Al Qaeda, destabilized the entire Middle East. Awful. Afghanistan, he could kind of be forgiven for a bit because, of course, 9/11, and it was in a response to that. But the lack of planning about what you did after you had kicked Al Qaeda out, I mean, he turned the war against the Taliban, decided to do like nation building for 20 years, ended in total failure. So, yeah, kind of not entirely his fault, fair bit of it though. He also ran a torture program in Guantanamo Bay. Now, obviously, the CIA had been torturing people forever, pretty much. But there were photos of this about American abuses in the Iraq War, and it was a major news topic. Definitely stained his presidency, so you just have to bring it up. And his economic policies contributed to the 2008 financial crisis, which launched Ireland into a recession. And all my cousins had to move, leave Ireland. So George Bush, go fuck yourself. Um, Also like a weird evangelical freak, to be honest. I hate him so much. I'm actually gonna put him on D tier. Fuck that guy. Okay, so now we're on to Obama. He was the two-term president for the Democrats. He started in 2008 and he inherited the financial crisis of 2008. And through his economic policies, he helped prevent a depression. That being said, he also bailed out a lot of the banks and does get some fair criticism for how exactly he handled it. But the overall point was that to an extent it worked and he prevented the economic crisis from worsening. So that's definitely a win on his side. One of his big policies was Obamacare, which would give it's not universal health care, it's like a halfway between private and public. So kind of like honestly something that should have happened in the US a really long time ago. But yeah, he does get criticism for not ramming through more policies while he had control of the Senate and the House of Representatives before losing them to the Republicans. But overall, he was kind of working with one hand behind his back for most of his presidency, one hand tied behind his back for most of his presidency by the opposition to the Republicans who, called him a communist and all this nonsense. Um, and then like just racist conspiracy theories about him, just really weird stuff. His foreign policy wins include the Iran nuclear deal, which I mean, look at what's happening right now. You realize Obama did the right thing, trying to improve relations with Iran by preventing them getting nuclear weapons, but in exchange, giving them money that the US had frozen. Um, of course, Trump dismantled it, but for the time, it was a big win. Of course, he got criticized to fuck, but that's just American politics. I think it was a great thing. He also tried to normalize relations with Cuba. This was only partly successful, but definitely started a brighter path for the US and Cuba than Trump has. I'll tell you that much. Things are getting horrific there right now. Foreign policy losses include, very famously, the Libyan civil war. He helped overthrow Gaddafi, didn't plan for what came after, and Libya has been dealing with a 15-year civil war ever since. Um, Afghanistan as well. He did a troop surge there, um, but he just stayed down there, pretty much bogged down for another 8 years. Didn't have the strength to pull out and admit they had lost. Um, And on top of that, the drone war. He really expanded. George Bush started it, but Obama brought it to new levels. He killed thousands of people throughout, I don't know, 2 or 3 continents, um, where he could just personally assassinate anybody he wanted. Um, Obviously, he used it mostly against jihadist groups, but pretty bleak stuff. Not a lot of oversight on it either. A lot of people criticize Obama. Um, Basically, he painted himself as like a radical candidate, and then he ruled like a moderate. I mean, that's 100% true. Um, Missed opportunity, I guess, if he kind of wanted a more, you know, populist sort of president. His failings and his trade deals, though, did lead to the rise of Donald Trump, right? I mean, Obama's the guy who gutted all the manufacturing jobs, and that led to the red states flipping for Trump. So he should get some blame for that, certainly. Overall, though, I think he did more good than he did bad, if that makes sense. So I'd give him a B right there. Yeah. Okay, up next we got Trump. I think you're all gonna know. You've all figured out what my opinion on him is gonna be. I'm just gonna list all the negatives. Um, Democratic erosion, abuse of power, attacks on the rule of law. I mean, he definitely wants to be a dictator. He's just kind of trapped in liberal institutions. He refused to peacefully concede an election for the first time in U.S. history. He's well known for insider trading, corrupt deals. He was a businessman in 1980s New York. So yeah, I mean that enough said. But corrupt to fuck. He packed the Supreme Court with right wing extremists that have dismantled Roe v. Wade as well as the Civil Rights Act. Disasters for civil rights and women's rights. His handling of COVID was horrific. Barely believed it was real. I mean, I couldn't even tell really what the fuck he was talking about, but definitely led to a lot of excess deaths. He's a dystopian immigration system. He's been deporting people to El Salvador without trial, they're getting abused there. He's beefed up ICE and has sent them in basically on like PR stunt missions that have resulted in ICE murdering several people. Um, he's kind of doing this whole like new age imperialism where he's basically reviving like the old US view of South America, which has never really gone away. That it's basically their back garden and they can do whatever they want with it. So he's threatened Greenland, Cuba, Nicaragua, Panama with US interventions, US invasions, and as well as Canada. And he's been bombing ships without any oversight, including civilian ships in the Caribbean. All horrific stuff, just naked imperialism. Um, he destroyed the Iran deal, which directly led to the Iran war that we have right now, which is causing a worldwide economic and oil crisis. His economic policies have been horrific, including his wish to tariff the entire world and put an end to the global economy, which benefits America, by the way, but he acts like it takes advantage of them. It's pretty weird. He's destroyed relations with US allies, which has bred a incredible amount of instability in the world, in East Asia, in the Middle East, in Europe. Just disastrous for the US, but just global stability in general. I mean, the amount of countries now that are looking to make their own nuclear weapons and militarize and build up their own militaries because they realize they can't rely on the US. Uh, it will come back to bite the US in their ass in the future for sure. And then, of course, he was BFFs with Jeffrey Epstein, massive abuser of women and children. Obviously, in the Epstein files, try to hide it, fail to. The guy's like a legit predator. Um, Easily the worst president in US history, I would say. Um, Definitely a D tier. I'll put him in there twice. There's two photos here because he served two different terms separately. Last but not least, we have Joseph Biden, Sleepy Joe. He was Democrat. He served one term from 2020 on. Immediately after taking office, he oversaw a strong economic recovery from COVID, which was one of the strongest economic recoveries in US history. He broke a 70-year record for low unemployment, created like, I think, 16 million new jobs. Um, However, during his time in office, wages stagnated and the share of wealth of the wealthiest continued to increase. So, didn't redistribute wealth or anything like that, but he did get them out of a dip economically. So, I guess that's a positive. Um, he was a pro-union president, which is pretty rare for the US. So that's positive, I think. It brought in a lot of like pro-unionization, policy of making it easier for people to form unions and stuff. Um, Also the second Catholic president, which is pretty crazy after JFK. Um, the the downsides, of course, his support for Israel during the Gaza genocide, biggest stain on his record. He really did seem to be like an ideological Zionist because he was progressive in some stuff, but when it came to Israel, just not at all. He's in that cult for sure. Um, a negative and a positive, I guess, is that you could say that he ended the war in Afghanistan. I think he did the right thing pulling out because it was kind of inevitable, but the way he did it was criticized pretty heavily because it wasn't particularly well planned, and that's a massive understatement. Um, the worst thing about him, not as bad as the Gaza genocide, but almost as bad, is the fact that his brain melted. I don't know, Alzheimer's, something. He is something. His mind started to go late in his presidency, kind of like Reagan did, actually. But it was really blatant for everyone to see. Um, and he refused to step down for ages, wanted to run for a second term. And then he dragged his feet, ended up allowing Kamala Harris to run after him. And we know how that ended. But I do think the way he handled his decline and the people around him handled his decline handed a second victory to Donald Trump for sure. So he should take a lot of that heat. Um, what else? Oh, there was pretty high inflation, although it's looking small compared to where things are heading with the oil crisis right now. But that also helped Trump get elected and was a point against Biden. Um, Overall, if it wasn't for Gaza and if it wasn't for how his presidency ended, I would maybe have given him. I mean, I think he could have been the best president in my lifetime. Um, but it just went to shit. I'll give him a B or C. Hmm. I'll give him a D. Um, yeah, I think that's fair enough. Okay, so there's the final list. S tier, we have FDR. B tier, we have Truman, Eisenhower, JFK, Obama. C tier, we have LBJ, Nixon, Ford, Jimmy Carter, Henry Ford, Bill Clinton, and Biden. And in D tier, we have Donald Trump, George Bush, and Ronald Reagan. You could say I've been overly harsh. Didn't give A tier to anybody. Um, But I just a lot of a lot of what the US has done since the end of World War II has been horrific. Not all bad, of course, they've done a lot of good, but, their presidents have, in general, been pretty evil to varying degrees. But, yeah, thanks very much for watching, guys, really appreciate it. If you enjoyed, please give a like and a subscribe, and I've done some other tier lists if you wanna check them out, including, the tier list of Irish Taoiseachs, Irish prime ministers. So check that out if you have an interest.